Hello and welcome to Work Reimagined. This is the podcast that explores some of the big questions about how work really works. I'm your host, Lee Ward, and each episode I'm going to bring you a guest from the world of work to discuss how work can be reimagined to make it a better experience for everyone. Now we're back after a short summer break for Series 2, and I'm excited about some of the guests that we've got lined up for you over the coming weeks. To kick things off, we're exploring one of the most talked about and possibly misunderstood shifts that's happening in the workplace at the moment and is reshaping our workplaces, the rise of AI, artificial intelligence, and large language models. My guest is Atreya Chaganty, who is the CEO of Quantenite, an organization that is helping businesses transform the way that they operate. Atreya's got a fascinating perspective and experience from working with lots of different organizations about how AI can move from being a tool on the sidelines to becoming a fully onboarded member of our team that I've seen some other organizations take the approach of. Cover lots of things in the conversation, including why trust is the missing ingredient or potentially the missing ingredient in unlocking the potential that AI can bring, how AI can actually help us leap not just from A to B, but A to C in terms of opening up lots of different opportunities, and why the top-down sponsorship is absolutely essential if AI is going to thrive inside your organization. So whether you're excited or apprehensive about AI, this is an episode that could just challenge how you see its role in your workplace. So here's my conversation with Atreya Chaganty. Atreya, thank you for joining us on Work Reimagined, a conversation that we're going to get into shortly around AI in the workplace, one that is a fast-moving topic and there's lots to discuss. But before we do that, could you give us a little introduction to yourself and what inspires the work that you do?
Sure. Thanks, Lee, and thanks for having me on the show. My name is Atreya Chaganty, and I play the role of CEO for a company called Quantenite. We are an AI-led, technology-centric process outsourcing company. So we work with some large enterprises, helping them with their business processes. My involvement in the enterprise workplace has been close to about 25 odd years. I've always been quite struck with how challenging it is to actually run a business successfully. It doesn't matter the size. I think all businesses, in my view, face experiences and challenges which are not too dissimilar, but they're very hard problems to solve. So I've been somewhat fascinated in trying to understand why problems tend to occur all the time repeatedly, and what can we do about it. I'm actually pretty excited with the way the industry is shaping with AI. So great to talk about this stuff.
And you're really at the forefront of that in terms of the work that you're doing and the business is doing. So it's going to be great to call on your experience and expertise. And I guess starting there, like we said, this is such a fast moving area of work. The technology itself is moving at such a pace. So it can feel quite challenging, I presume, for organizations to keep up to date with that, about what the latest options and opportunities for them are. What kind of conversations are you having with businesses in this area? And what kind of challenges are you seeing them grapple with, really, to take advantage of this massive opportunity?
Yeah, it is. It is really quite a dynamic space, and I think the impact of the constant barrage of new things that are coming out, it does require a fair bit of comprehension and management. We work in sectors which are relatively diverse. I would say broadly every one of the companies that we tend to deal with is in some way being impacted by this change. And these changes can be quite profound. And the way companies react to these changes is also fairly dissimilar. So there is really a question of need to understand the impact that these technologies have on the business itself. I think competition is rapidly increasing in the workplace, and I think artificial intelligence has really accelerated the challenges of staying ahead of the game. We often talk about these tools democratizing in some ways capability, which actually sounds somewhat scary and bizarre, but at a grassroots level, that does impact what you feel you can do differently and better than the others, which is almost core to the strategic imperative of every company. And we are finding that actually being impacted by AI. And I think the impact of that core being chipped away at is really fundamentally needing to understand what is it that we ought to do for our customers better than the others. So I almost feel it's existential, and I don't think it's a word that is too misplaced from our point of view.
You've talked before about there's still an element across a number of industries or businesses around the trust in AI. And I guess if it is customer facing, then there's a real kind of onus on delivering a high quality customer service as well as all the data that they might have available. Do you see that as still a challenge of this? How much can we trust AI? How much can we how much do we keep it at arm's length? How much do we really adopt it?
Yes, I think that is quite fundamental to the challenge and the problems that we see. As we know, with the advent of large language models, which are primarily driven by learning on data, the need for almost offloading your thinking to these models in some ways goes to the core of the problem and hence the trust issue. How do I know that the response and the answer from the AI models is not just accurate, but is topical, is the right one for me to utilize. There's some fascinating research that's coming out now from various academics as well as researchers, but also from partnerships with the industry, and it's kind of reflecting real world evidence. And one of those really is how people tend to almost implicitly rely on the accuracy of large language models, and what it tends to say is rarely questioned. And we could probably reflect on our own experience of using ChatGPT or any other favorite large language model that you are used to using, and how often do you actually critique its responses? When does your fascination for what it says kind of wane and you begin to challenge it in some meaningful ways, as you would perhaps a colleague or your manager or even your clients and customers? And I think that element, when we translate into making enterprise wide decisions, or you're trying to utilize artificial intelligence in handling customer issues, then suddenly being needing to be providing these answers that can be trusted and that are accurate, and have the right information and background is super important.
We'll come on to what you see as still being the important human-centric skills that are needed with this AI enabled kind of world, but that skill to critique and to spot some of the inaccuracies that might be there or spot some of the opportunities for development, I think is going to be a key skill that you talked about there. Are you, in terms of that trust space, are you seeing things that organizations are doing that to move beyond that, and to encourage more of a trusting culture within its staff in terms of using what's available to them?
Yes, it is. It is a complex topic, and I think a lot of it really is dependent and related to the kind of problems that you're trying to solve. At a technical level, I would argue that companies and enterprises' ability to use large language models out of the box, but needing to tune and contextualize this with your own enterprise information is vital. Fundamentally, at that layer, it's about improving the quality of those responses based on your business. The human side of it, essentially all of us, you, me, and all the other users who tend to use these models in an enterprise context, from an enterprise point of view, these trained models do need strong levels of integration into the enterprise workflow. One of the studies that I found quite instructive is one where using using large language models and artificial intelligence, there is a difference in its in usability and effectiveness when an individual in the company uses versus a team using exactly the same model. And the research essentially shows that the effectiveness in terms of time reduction or efficacy of use in problem solving, whatever it is that you're trying to do, it jumps substantially higher when you are an individual user compared to a baseline of you being a team user. So there is something around deploying these models in an enterprise context where I think a lot of work still needs to be done in order for us to be able to drive the promise of these models. But I think what seems to be clear, certainly from our experience, has been the fact that the richness of these models is unparalleled. And I think its ability to solve problems and its inferencing capability, I think, is only increasing. So it's a question of how well we can harness it and how quickly can it be harnessed.
That research that you referenced there, Atreya, is fascinating. Was there anything in there that explained the difference of why there was such high productivity at individual level compared to team or organization wide level?
Yeah, I think it might be instructive to kind of intuitively think about this. When I have a question in my day-to-day job, and I'll take an example of perhaps I'm researching a topic or perhaps I'm trying to understand a certain company. It's quite easy for me to just simply do that research, whether using deep research or similar components using large language models, and I get a reasonably effective response that I can apply my own experience to either accommodate the response or perhaps take what I need from it. From a group context, however, it's quite likely that the kind of problems you're trying to solve in a group might have a slightly different need that you're trying to solve. So, one of the things that a group setting can benefit from using these models is brainstorming, ideation. So, you can actually ideate amongst yourselves, and then you can flip over and utilize the large language models to understand what does the LLM think about this problem and how would it resolve, and then essentially comparing a set of responses to come up with a larger domain of responses that you can curate. Now, that's pretty powerful. So, there are nuances between how an individual attempts to use this versus a group. But one thing that is quite interesting, I find, is there is still a low element um, of acknowledging your use of large language models in your day-to-day work. So a lot of the research that is again emerging seems to indicate that while there is a very high level of usage, not a lot of people are willing to admit that they're using it in their day-to-day work. And that's also probably as much a question of trust that you were discussing earlier, not necessarily only in the accuracy of the answer, but how will the company perceive me using these tools in my day-to-day work? Does the company prescribe it, or is the company supportive of it? And I think it's a critical question that I feel companies need to come to some terms with, and many companies in our experience are trying to handle it in different ways.
I do see this myself in terms of there's still a feeling of it's almost cheating to be using some of the technology that's available to do some of the tasks. Right? I think the individual and the team dynamic and the research you referenced there, to me, emphasizes that point. There's a real individual element to this of how do you support people adopt what's available to them and feel comfortable doing that. And you talked about you have everything from somebody that absolutely relies on it for everything to somebody else that needs to be dragged to sit in front of the computer and showing how to do it. And there's that trust element to it. The team bit, I'm really interested in that and exploring that a little bit more because a real useful approach that I've seen people take with this or discuss is rather than seeing it as a tool to use, actually start seeing it as a member of the team and how we might incorporate it and kind of integrate it into our team. And it sounds that's a similar sort of thing you talked there about the collaboration. I don't know if you've seen organizations do that or practically if they took that approach, what that might mean of seeing it as a team and how we might then, like I said, integrate it, onboard it as you would a member of staff.
Yes, I think the concept of bringing in AI tools to collaborate in your day-to-day work, we tend to do it fairly extensively. Well, one example really could be in terms of how you tend to. We spoke about ideation, but a lot of the analysis work on a day-to-day basis, we've created application frameworks where we are able to outsource some of the day-to-day analysis work to artificial intelligence and large language models based applications that we have built on our own. What we have found across the last 2 years that we have heavily invested in building skill sets in this area is that you don't necessarily need to have extremely deep experience in doing it. And these tools tend to be able to support you in that journey quite extensively as long as you're able to harness the capability. So they become effective collaborators in areas that you can dip into them, perform a piece of work, get the response back, and integrate into your decision making process. So we've identified a couple of enterprise functions where our approach currently is to deeply embed artificial intelligence into the functions. Recruitment is one, where we tend to deploy everything from the way we write job descriptions in our hiring process to doing video analysis of interviews and essentially rank scoring our interviews with a lot of human recruitment oversight right around it. We are monitoring these applications to understand how they actually learn through the reinforcement learning models that we are implementing to be able to eliminate biases in the interview selection process because some of our initial work tends to suggest to us that those kind of guardrails, if you may, those kind of support mechanisms are quite vital. Employee engagement or the broader human resource management area is one that we started our AI journey about 2.5 years ago with the LLM models effectively helping us with our employee engagement strategy. So the onboarding process, as well as employees being able to self-serve. We use it quite extensively in our operations areas, where everything from customer quality assurance processes that we run in our day-to-day work to resource management and learning and development activities. So it's increasingly becoming a tool which no longer sits on the sidelines but becomes part of our day-to-day work. And I'm finding it actually hard to visualize how that will not happen even more going further.
You talked about the learning that these models are doing. I think for me, it's not only struggling to see how it isn't part of the day-to-day work, but also, I guess, grasping what it might look like in even 12 months' time and what conversation we might be having in 12 months' time about this in terms of how it's being used and what it can do. I know we're only talking here for 20, 25 minutes, and there's so much, like we said, to explore. But if there is a business out there that is quite the early stage of their kind of experience of this or exploring it, what would you recommend to them of how to get started and how to understand what might be some of the opportunities that are available to them?
I would definitely encourage the leadership of that company that is in the early parts of the journey to recognize that their sponsorship will prove to be vital. While many of the employees of that company in your example might perhaps be using these tools already today, but for the benefit of that usage to positively impact the company, I think there is a significant amount of top-down leadership and sponsorship that certainly from our experience we have seen is quite vital for the tone to be set from the top. There is, I would also argue, a need for separating the conventional notion of what we in the enterprise world call automation versus how large language models and the broader artificial intelligence capabilities actually do get deployed. So while there is a ton of work that can be quote unquote automated, I think thinking much more broadly about reimagining the scope of the problem typically tends to create substantially more value added solutions. So it's not about how do you go from point A to point B much faster, more efficiently with less cost. It's about how do you skip point B to directly go from point A to point C, well, that's a slightly different definition of your problem domain. And I think the faster you are on that thinking path, our experience shows greater would be the ability to capture value. But I think beyond the strategic element, there are definitely challenges that we have found in our own experience again in terms of taking the entire workforce with you. What does it mean? Everything from reskilling to identifying how the nature of work itself will change. And I think and I think those are quite idiosyncratic to the scenarios of every company. But I think recognizing that there is a need for taking people on the journey is quite a fundamental element, I feel, because of the deep rooted nature of the impact that we believe this will have.
And there's still an emotional element that will be at play to this, won't there? Because you're talking about people's jobs and the work that they do, and they're kind of even down to the tasks and activities that they'll be doing within those jobs as well. And I love that concept of not just going from A to B and how do we do that quicker, but actually what is C? And we might not even have thought about C being available to us now, but this technology and these tools make that suddenly accessible, and exploring that. And I guess that again comes into that human element of being able to explore what that might be and what might be available to us. It's been fascinating, as I thought it would be. And given, like we said, the pace of development with this, I can see us coming back and having another conversation at some point. But for today, we're going to move on to the quick fire questions, the closing questions that we always do. And I'm really interested to get your views on these, given the number of businesses and organizations and leaders that you have worked with. Before we do that, though, if there are people that want to continue the conversation with you and explore it a bit more, what's the best way for them to get in touch and connect with you?
Drop me an email. That's probably the best way. Connect on LinkedIn. You can look me up on LinkedIn too, and welcome any engagement requests.
Brilliant. And we'll put those links in the episode description as well, so people can go straight to those. So the closing quick fire questions, Atreya, so if there was one thing about workplace culture that you think needs reimagining, what would that be and why?
I think it's a conviction of belief. Companies do need to feel that they're providing a robust direction to their people. Having that purpose for why companies work, why people work for companies, is fundamental. We are quite purpose driven ourselves. In fact, we created our purpose, if you may, collectively from the grassroots. It wasn't really dictated by me or by the board or anybody else for that matter. And I have found that to be a very helpful construct to be able to create some level of cohesion.
And it sounds like fantastic leadership in terms of doing that from the bottom up, which leads me on to my second question. If there's a myth about leadership that you hear still being talked about that you think needs changing, what would that be?
I'll probably put a slightly personal spin to this, but I think there is often an expectation that the leader of the company or the leaders of the company have all the answers, and often at times you are asked to come across as being in charge. We'll figure it out. Don't you know? I'll be the first to admit I do not have all the answers, and I think it's not as much about admitting that you don't have all the answers as it is about creating that conversation where we can collectively figure it out. And I have personally found that that is a lot more valuable and a more sensible way of approaching the unknown, because I wish I had all the answers.
I think that's really relevant to our conversation as well, isn't it? We just said about not really being able to see what the workplace will look like in 12 months because of the technology that will be available. And I think it's that transparency of leaders to say, actually, the adoption of AI, the integration of AI, we don't have all the answers of what that's going to bring and what opportunities and challenges it's going to bring. But like you said, we want to take you on that journey with us and be part of that journey. And I think that's a great message for lots of different topics, but particularly relevant for this one in terms of not having all the answers of what that path might look like, but we want to go on it together. So my last closing question is, in one word, what do you believe is key to a thriving workplace?
I would have to say trust, and perhaps safety as a related moniker, but fundamentally trust. People need to feel safe and trusting the environment that they're working in. I don't necessarily mean safety or trustworthiness from job security point of view. I think that's a more complicated question. There are economics and other related elements around job security that needs to be managed appropriately, least of which being impacted through AI. But if people don't feel safe in all the ways that one interprets safety at work, then I think it can become very quickly a value destructive organization or an environment, which we ought to avoid, I feel.
Absolutely. Atreya, thank you for giving up your time, and thank you for sharing your experience and expertise as well.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of Work Reimagined. Thanks to Atreya for sharing his experience with us and that discussion about the future of AI at work. As always, if you've enjoyed this episode, there's lots of ways you can help to keep this conversation going. Follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a quick review or rating. That really does help new listeners discover the show. And if you know someone who's really grappling with that role of AI in their workplace, maybe share this episode with them and it could just spark their next big idea. Until next time, thanks for listening to Work Reimagined.